Managed Mentoring Guide for Getting Started in Beekeeping. Things You Will See, Part 2. I am Kevin England. Picking up where we left off and moving forward, Part 2 is going to highlight some of the commonly seen bee behaviors, activities common to the operation of the hive, and will highlight some watch items to keep an eye out for. We'll conclude the lesson with a few miscellaneous points to wrap everything up. In lesson number 1, we talked about all the conventional comb building that the bees do. Now we're going to turn to some errant comb. Burr comb, bridge comb, brace comb. These are the names that beekeepers use when they discover errant comb in places within the hive where it's not part of the frame honeycomb. Bees will build errant comb on top of the frames, like what's depicted, off the bottom of the frames, on the interior woodenware, wherever it suits them. Loosely, bridge comb is something that you see the bees building from one place to another. As the name suggests, it provides a pathway for the bees to walk upon to get from one surface to the next. Brace comb describes comb created by the bees to shore something up. Burr comb is extraneous comb, built off the bottoms and tops of the frames on inner covers or other surfaces like the feeder shown in the upper left. As an aside, these descriptors are debated as to what they are. As such, it should be considered that these are general terms and not formal definitions. Oftentimes, you'll find that you will need to cut or scrape away excess comb. We recommend you have a Ziploc bag in your kit to collect whatever you cut off. And we also suggest that you do not leave extraneous comb on the frames, especially on the top and bottom bars. Bees will connect the surfaces when one frame sits over another, and this really complicates frame extraction upon future inspections. Ideally, bees would take to the foundation provided and draw comb as anticipated. There are a handful of times when they build comb not to our liking. It happens with both wax and plastic foundation, but by our experience, there are 10 occurrences for plastic to every one for wax. If this happens, simply scrape off the errant comb and return the frame for the bees to try again. One thing to watch for is that you vigorously maintain bee space within the colony. Keep the frames close together, as open spaces are filled with unwanted honeycomb. In the case of plastic foundations, sometimes the problems are a result of how they were coated from the factory. You may have to recoat the surface in a manner which is more suitable to the bees in order to get it draw out properly. Take some of the errant comb, melt it down, brush it on, put it back. The frame in the upper right-hand corner was likely a result of not pulling an outer frame into the brood area for the bees to build when they were building honeycomb. If you left that frame out there to the point where the bees stopped providing wax builders to build honeycomb, it's likely to maintain that state through the end of the season and into next year. Sometimes you can take those frames and put them back in the center and they'll finish the job. A lot of times they end up looking just like that until you pull them and replace them with fresh foundation. Incoming pollen is something you should see relatively quickly upon installing a package or a nuke. Bees fetch pollen for the purpose of feeding the colony and raising bees. If you see pollen coming in, it's a pretty good bet that bees are being created by the colony. Watch for bees with pollen in their pollen baskets at the entrance, or you'll find them walking on the face of the comb looking for a cell to store it in. Another thing you'll see with close observation at the entrance is guard bees. They are on patrol at all times. They are also right behind the entrance when the bees are operating in the hive interior. They will come to defense of the colony in a moment's notice if something causes alarm. They can often be spied by looking at how they inspect returning bees upon landing. They will approach the incoming bees and verify that it's a member of the colony, usually through touch and smell. They could be spied by the telltale posture represented in the image on the slide. Somewhere in your journey as a beekeeper, you're going to see this. There are a number of occasions where bees employ a tactic to distribute a chemical from a gland at the end of their abdomen. The Nasanov gland emits a scent that airborne bees can detect. It's known as the come here scent. Bees employ this tactic when they are trying to draw nestmates into the collective. Scenting bees will be head down, abdomen up, and have their wings fanning. The tip of the abdomen will be tipped down, kind of like a Concorde airplane if you know the reference. One can spot the gland, Nasanov gland, as a milky white band at the end tip of the abdomen if you look closely. In this image, bees are collected on the exterior of the hive and can be seen hanging off the bottom board. The hanging bees resemble a man's beard, presumably leading to the name of this behavior. Bees collect and beard for a number of reasons. The most common being that they are coming out of the hive to prevent the buildup of heat on the interior. Bees, like humans, give off heat, and it is less work for the bees to maintain appropriate temperatures of the hive interior if there is less heat being generated by the population of bees that have come outside. This shot is a reinforcement of brood in all stages, something that's also called bias by beekeepers. It's a graduation of developing bees by age as laid by the queen. Often the graduation progresses from egg to larva to mature larva and so on. The uniform pattern, when taken to its conclusion, will lead to the center bees emerging first. If you think about the image from part number 1 that showcased creating the telltale hole in the capped brood as the bees emerge from gestation, this is the precursor to that, and you can imagine that the bees in the center of the slide will be the first ones to come out. It's important to note here that this is something you are likely not going to see. It is not common to see varroa mites on the exterior surfaces of the honeybees in this fashion. Varroa mites more commonly attach to the underside of the bee, which of course is not visible to beekeepers as the bees are walking around on the comb. Now, this slide does demonstrate that occasionally you might see a mite on the back of the bee, but most of the time they're moving to the underside in order to feed on the bee. The only real way to see varroa mites is to do proper monitoring and test the bees to see whether you have varroa mites present. You are not going to see them walking around on the backs of the bees. This slide is of a hive in trouble. Chances are your hive will have a working queen and you will not see this. Still, some queens go south and you might find that your brood pattern looks like this. What you're looking at is a queen or possibly a laying worker placing unfertilized eggs into worker cells. The resultant drones are too big for the cell and you get what is referred to as bullet drones. The capping looks like the tip of a bullet. If you see this in your colony, reach out to us as you clearly have some kind of problem. Now, one thing to note, it's likely that this hive has been in trouble for quite a while because the main type of bees visible on the frames are all drones. To happier times, this is what we call the rainbow effect. Just take this slide in for a moment. We're going to talk about this dynamic. This is another example of a brood frame that has the same rainbow effect. This is a well-provisioned frame of bees. The highlighted area represents the brood under development on this frame. Describing why we like it, it has a large population of future bees for your colony. It is supported by a ring of fresh, nutritious pollen, and there's abundant nectar and honey stores in the margins. These bees have been well provisioned and should emerge as healthy, well-nourished, productive bees, and that's why we say, trust the rainbow. Now, this is our last slide of the two-part lesson, but one that's important to share at this juncture. Knowing what's normal is critical in order for you to avoid life-threatening emergencies. It stands to reason that as humans, we need to breathe. That's fundamental. Any reaction that compromises your ability to breathe normally is an acute emergency. Now look, normal reactions look messy. They're your body's immune system reaction, and you swell, you have some redness, inflammation, itching. These are all typical. Any stings, however, that result in compromise in breathing, swelling of the throat, dizziness, lightheadedness, difficulty swallowing, they are all potential or probable emergencies. You should seek immediate medical care. This is, of all the things one could see, one that we hope you never have to experience. I'm going to kind of read from the slide here. I'll skip past the should be local and topical, but one important aspect is reactions that are a concern is if you get stung remotely and you're having a reaction in your throat area, unlike the picture where you've been stung on the throat, that is an emergency. Normally, a sting to the extremity does not manifest to anything that results in scratchy throats, difficulty breathing, swallowing, the symptoms that we had. But you should also be extremely careful for any stings that you take around the head and neck, which is why we say always, always, always wear a veil or some sort of head protection when you're in the apiary. This is the conclusion of the two-part Things You Will See lesson. We covered bee behaviors, some management practices, and a few other odds and ends. Coming up, we continue down our path to a full-grown hive. We'll talk about feeding your new colonies, record keeping, and getting you prepped for some equipment you'll need for the summer stretch. All on the quest to get from one box to two. If you have questions, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Hover over the video and click on the YouTube link if you're watching from our website. Thanks for watching. We'll see you at the next lesson.